I now give the floor to the representative of Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me also thank to Mr. Simonovich for his briefing today. Ukraine values your and your team's important input. Mr. President, the mission's latest report reveals the true nature of the criminal organizations which are committing terrible abuses against our citizens. Entire towns and villages are being used as human shields. Their gunmen are kidnapping civilians for the purpose of ransom, exchange, or use as labor force. Others, they are torturing and murdering. How do these crimes help the people they claim to represent? Their tactics are nothing more than terrorism, threatening the lives, health, well-being of our compatriots. It is the obligation of the government to protect its own citizens. This is paramount objective of Ukraine's operation against the terrorists. Terrorists who have refused to enter into a political dialogue. Terrorists who are led by foreigners who are working for the secret services of the Russian Federation. Mr. President, the monitoring mission's report also clearly demonstrates that the Russian occupation of Crimea had led to harassment and discrimination against ethnic Ukrainians, Crimean Tatars, members of religious minorities, and activists who opposed to the so-called Crimean referendum of 16 March. Even now, people continue to disappear. Ukrainian and Crimean Tatar newspapers are under the threat of being shut down. We are deeply concerned with the violations. We underline that as the occupying power, it is Russia's responsibility to ensure observance of human rights and freedoms of the population of Crimea. On our part, the government of Ukraine will take all feasible efforts to protect our compatriots' rights and freedoms in the occupied territories. Mr. President, Ukraine will not tolerate politically motivated cases against Nadia Savchenko and 5 other militaries, which are vivid examples of Russia's negligence of human rights standards. Allegations brought against our citizens have no legal grounds and are used as instruments of political manipulation and pressure. There is no humanitarian crisis in Ukraine. However, the growing number of internally displaced persons from Crimea and the Luhansk and Donetsk regions is disturbing. At the same time, the credibility of the information on the huge number of refugees from Ukraine to Russia presented by the Russian authorities is very doubtful and needs to be assessed by international experts. Mr. President, the government of Ukraine accepts the recommendations contained in the monitoring mission's report. Ukraine is ready to further develop and deepen cooperation with the Office of the UN Human Commissioner for Human Rights in order to ensure the protection of human rights, taking into account all the needs of the population of every region of our country. We fully acknowledge that there are still a lot to be done to strengthen rule of law and democracy in our country. Yesterday, in his speech at the Constituent Assembly of the National Council of Reforms, President Petro Poroshenko said that a war cannot be an excuse for the lack of reform. We see the recently signed association agreement with the European Union as an integrated document which provides the framework for reform in Ukraine. Successful investigation of the high-profile cases, such as human rights violations during the protests in Independence Square and the tragedy in Odessa, is a matter of honor to the leadership of Ukraine and remains a top priority. Ukraine law enforcement agency will cooperate fully with the UN mission in monitoring the process of this investigation. The downing of MH17 is a tragedy that may constitute a grave violation of international law, which may amount to war crimes. The government of Ukraine makes every effort to ensure fair international investigation of the incident in accordance with Resolution 2166. We reiterate our call to Russia to use its influence on the illegal armed groups in order to make them granting full and unimpeded access to the crash site for the international investigation team. We have the conclusive evidence that MH17 was downed by Russia-backed terrorists with a Buk M system fired by a crew had been delivered from Russia. This confirmed by our intelligence, intercepted telephone conversation of the terrorists and satellite images. Mr. President, to conclude, I would like just to say that the situation in Ukraine, on the Ukraine-Russia border, remains extremely tense. Russia continues to build up its military along border with Ukraine and to shell settlements and positions of the counter-terrorism forces of Ukraine located near the border. Russian military aircrafts and drones violate Ukraine airspace daily. There are serious grounds to expect a large-scale and open invasion of Russian troops into Ukraine under the guise of peacekeeping operation. In this context, we want to mention that no Russian forces can enter the territory of Ukraine without the consent of Ukrainian authorities. Any Russian troops entering the territory of Ukraine will be regarded as aggressors and treated accordingly. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the representative of Ukraine for his statement.